Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. This is the story of a man who meets and marries a woman who has epilepsy. They have a happy marriage for many years, but the wife starts working longer hours and becomes distant. The husband becomes suspicious and installs a spying app on her phone, discovering she's been seeing another woman named Christy. The wife admits to being in love with Christy and leaves the husband. However, Christy ends their relationship when she's transferred to another town, leaving the wife heartbroken and eventually evicted. The husband moves on, adopts a raccoon, and begins dating someone new, learning to live on his own again. Now let's get into the story. When my wife 36 and I 30 met, she told me she had epilepsy and would occasionally have seizures. She managed them pretty well, but sometimes it still happened. I wasn't too worried and continued dating her. We were together for 5 years before she had a seizure in my presence. It was terrifying. All I wanted to do was stop it for her, but I couldn't. I did everything I learned to do for her, and when it finally stopped and she came to, I was relieved. We were married that same year. Fast forward 11 years. She had seizures a little more often, about twice a year. Every time she had one, she told me she realized how fragile life was as she knew it. It was all dependent on her brain's health, which she couldn't control. She still worked and I worried about her. One day, out of the blue, she tells me she wants to work more hours. I tried to tell her we didn't need more income and I appreciated the time she spent at home with me and our pets. She wasn't convinced. She said she needed to dedicate her time to something, and she was passionate about crafts and wanted to earn more money. She already got a discount at the store, so more money meant she could buy more craft supplies. I finally gave in. I got the idea that she wasn't going to let this go. So instead of coming home at 2, she started coming home anywhere between 5 and 8. It was odd to me that even when I asked her to keep her schedule consistent and give it to me in advance, she never did. She said they'd change her hours even after printing them out. This was frustrating, and I'd spend a lot of nights alone with dinner ready, wondering if she was going to be home soon. I finally got tired of it and asked her to fully quit. She obviously said no and added that she was enjoying herself. I told her I wasn't and at least wanted to know when she'd be home each night. When her behavior continued anyway, I accepted defeat for a while, just until I noticed that her paychecks didn't increase very much at all. We had a joint bank account, and her direct deposit was still happening, but it was as if she only took another 2 hours a week. This was the last straw. I installed a spying app on her phone while she slept. When she went to work the next day, I was going to know if she went anywhere else before coming home. Sure enough, she went to an address I had never seen before in some random neighborhood. When she got home an hour and a half later, I couldn't contain myself anymore, and I confronted her. She laughed a soft chuckle and told me she just took her friend home from work, and afterward they watched a few episodes of a show. She apologized for not letting me know and said she wouldn't go anywhere else after work. Again, I was surprised she was so calm and had a reasonable explanation for going somewhere else. I asked why her paychecks didn't go up, and she was still totally calm while she said it was because I was right about us not needing that much more money, so she upped the percentage of retirement money they took out of her pay. I was almost convinced I apologized to her for being suspicious, but she said she understood why we made love and it was perfect. The next night, after she came home from work on time, she had a seizure. I gave her the medicine she needed, wiped the drool off her face, moved her hair behind her ear, and got her a pillow. She was pretty groggy and typed out a text on her phone. She dropped it on the floor next to her, and I happened to be able to see it. The message she just sent said "I love you." Had to say it before it's too late. It instantly felt like I was floating without a body. I was in shock. The person she sent it to was programmed as Christy. My mouth started to dry, and I felt like I was going to choke on my own tongue. I actually gagged. My wife looked at me, starting to realize I was acting weird. I reached down to pick up her phone, and she grabbed it before me, asking me what I was doing. I told her I just saw her messages with Christy, and needed to know what was going on behind my back. She looked like a deer in headlights. She couldn't believe she'd been so careless and threw her phone on the floor without turning off the screen. She tried to talk, but all that came out were squeaks and stuttering. I screamed at the top of my lungs for her to tell me she jumped out of her skin and started shaking. She said she was hanging out with a girl named Christy after work every night. She thought at first they were just really good friends, but she realized it was really difficult for her to even stand one night apart from her. She was falling in love with Christy and wanted to keep seeing her. I jumped off the couch and started pacing while I asked her more questions. Now that she met Christy, she felt like she was always meant to be with her and I was just a placeholder in her life. I was completely shaken and didn't know what I needed to say anymore. It was like nothing mattered at all. But I was mad. It felt like the emotional equivalent of trying to catch falling sand with your hands. It was frustrating, if not impossible. And why did it matter anyway? I immediately went to pack. I couldn't stay here even if she was willing to leave. We were renting the house, so I figured I could find a different place to rent soon enough. My wife apologized to me, but it didn't seem sincere. She actually seemed amused, even though she was trying hard not to look that way. I went to stay at my brother's house. My ex was pretty happy for the first 3 weeks. She probably had Christy over a lot, maybe even for the whole time. But then beautiful consequences started to happen. Christy was a shift supervisor at their workplace, and she wasn't supposed to be in relationship with any coworkers. When they transferred her to another store in a different town, it was more logical for her to move closer to it. When Christy left my ex's apartment, she told her their relationship was over. Short flame if I ever saw one. My wife cried herself to sleep every night, leaving me extremely long voicemails that I never listened to all the way through. The divorce was final around the time my wife was evicted from our old place. She didn't work enough hours to pay the bills alone, and they didn't want her to work more hours. She stayed at a cheap motel for a week until she left town. She didn't tell me where she was going, just that she felt like the biggest fool in the world. She said she knew she had to go through this hard lesson of humility and accept fault for ruining our marriage. At least she learned something. I mean, I'd hoped she would never do something so stupid ever again. But what she did to me, she couldn't take back. I found a place to rent and adopted a raccoon. He's awesome. And I've started seeing a nice girl, but we've only had one date. I am learning and accepting to live on my own for a while until I know for sure I'm ready to commit to someone permanently again. Here are my thoughts on the situation. You've been through a challenging relationship experience, and it's important to ensure you have emotional support and people to confide in. Not all spouses behave dishonorably. There are those who are on a journey of self-growth and change. In any relationship, certain values can bring true happiness and contentment: humility, honor, selflessness, a willingness to accept change, and effective communication. Remember that effective communication involves listening attentively to your spouse. They have something to share, and you are their partner, influencing their quality of life. Thank you for sharing your story with us, and remember that there is hope for positive growth and change in relationships. Today's second story. In this story, a man discovers his wife's plans to divorce him and have an affair with her friend's husband. He confronts them, leading to the end of his marriage and his mother's marriage as well. The man obtains proof of the affair and secures custody of their children and the family home. He eventually tells his mother about her husband's infidelity, leading to her divorce. The man sells the house and buys a duplex for himself and his mother, with his children supporting the decision. Despite the turmoil, the family finds a way to move forward and rebuild their lives. Now let's get into the story. Around the time my wife and I were celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary and oldest daughter's birthday, I used my wife's phone without her knowledge and found that she had Googled questions about divorce. I was shaking as I looked through her phone messages. I figured if I didn't know this, I might not know about something else. And I was right. She was messaging a girlfriend of hers about how she was tired of me, tired of being a housewife life, and wanted a chance to live her life how she wanted. Her friend talked about another man that she thought was me, but my wife corrected her, saying she was thinking of her boyfriend. Her friend advised her to file for divorce and end the marriage before she was caught cheating. She should have taken her friend's advice, but my bored housewife said she needed more time to secure her future life in advance. She wanted to make sure AP was ready for her to move in. She admitted that she planned to have AP over at our house the next time I left for a few days. I didn't know if this was the first time or just the only time she told her friend about it. She was saying terrible things, but she expected her friend to understand, not criticize her. Her friend said she was living an unfulfilled life, so she had every right to do what she wanted. That's when my wife added that she even planned to let me have full custody of our kids. I was shocked and heartbroken. It was like she didn't realize or care about how much this would affect them. I searched her phone for any secret messaging app, but I couldn't find anything, so I didn't know who AP was. I sent myself proof of this conversation and put my wife's phone back exactly where it was. Moving away from it seconds before she came into the room looked really upset, but I used that to add credibility to my lie. I said, I just got off the phone with my boss who needed me to go on a business trip in place of a sick coworker. She looked pleased about it, but had to pretend she was disappointed. She snatched her phone and left the room. I packed and gave my wife a heartfelt goodbye and kiss. She didn't know it was the last time I would kiss her. I drove somewhere else for 2 hours. When I came back, my mom's newest husband's car was outside her house. My heart was racing as I recalled the last time we had a family gathering. My wife was definitely talking to him. I couldn't hear much, but she had flirty eyes and stood really close to him. We attended their wedding 2 years prior and my wife said he looked incredible for his age. I'm sure his wealth didn't attract her at all. More family outings came to mind where my wife and stepdad were alone or could have done something right under my nose. I then went through the back door because the lock was broken. Thankfully, our kids were staying with friends for the weekend. Finding the downstairs empty, I went upstairs and knocked on the locked bedroom door. I heard my wife suck in air that she didn't let out for the next 20 minutes. It took her 2 minutes to open the door and I could hear more than one person scrambling around to clean up and get dressed. When she opened the door, my mom's husband was standing shamefully beside our bed. It was the only place to stand in the room. The bed was quickly made. You could tell they were just on it, so I told them they were caught. I knew they were sleeping with each other because I saw my wife's phone earlier. AP looked ashamed and extremely embarrassed to be in this position. My wife was only upset because her future was now uncertain. Knowing who AP was, I concluded that she expected him to leave my mother so they could move in together. Now the tables had turned. I had proof. So even if she changed her mind and just wanted to keep the affair going, or P broke up with her, there was no going back. AP asked me to forgive him and promised that if I didn't tell my mother, he would rededicate his life to making her the happiest woman alive. I just gave him a cold, hard look since he thought I would actually buy that garbage. He looked at my wife for a split second, saying he made a huge mistake by seeing her without my knowledge. I don't think he could say what they did out loud. I asked, but he just crossed his arms, covered his mouth, and looked down. I asked if they slept together and he shamefully nodded. My wife then said she was wrong for betraying my trust and needed me in her life. She said she was sorry for believing she was bored Lord and needed a change. I asked my despicable stepfather to leave. My wife begged me to get into bed with her and let this go. She said 13 out of 15 years of loyalty isn't too bad and I should be able to forgive and stay with her. Meaning she was having this affair with AP for 2 years, since their wedding day. I told her she was disgusting to ruin my mother's marriage and ours, and she was going to lose her husband, children, and home because of this. The tears started flowing again, but I did not care. She was not the person I thought she was. Later that night, I slept in the guest room without saying another word to her. I also called my mom and told her what happened. She was absolutely heartbroken, but thanked me for letting her know I stayed in that room for the time it took to get the divorce finalized. My mom was also planning on divorcing AP. I didn't tell the kids what happened, but I'm sure they knew something was going on since me and their mom were quite distant. I think my wife hoped I would change my mind last minute if she behaved honorably while we went through the motions. AP swore via text he would never forgive himself, and he vowed to me that he would never see my wife again. I wondered if he realized he just gave me proof to show my mother, not that I needed it. She would probably believe me. While waiting for the divorce to become final, I told my wife that her income was going to pay all the bills. That was the least she could do for the heartbreak she caused me. She agreed, and she spent lots of time with our children, which was bittersweet to me. I saved up money and sold some of my baseball card collection to gather enough for a down payment on a house. It had 2 sections, one for me and one for my mother. Then, just after the divorce was final, I told her the truth about her husband. She was devastated, but at least I was able to soften the blow by telling her about our new way of living. She took a week to have it out with AP and back her things. But I was there with her. No one should have to go through this. But when I considered keeping the truth from her, it didn't feel right. After proving my wife's infidelity and willingness to give me the house in custody, the judge found it impossible to believe her lies. She was forced to move in with the only person willing to have her, which was her boss. You can imagine how awkward it must have been when she had no choice but to fire her due to her poor job performance. I sold the house to help me pay off the deluxe duplex with 3 bedrooms each. My kids love the house and told me they're old enough to understand that life is full of change. They actually thanked me for handling this as well as I could for them.